You're listening to the Outside the Walls podcast. I'm Kris. Today, Kris Loan and I are having a second conversation with scholar Dan Morrison about the book of Revelation. The big topics we're going to cover in this conversation are, first of all, why do we modern Christians continually default to thinking that Revelation is all about future technologies and events instead of speaking to the first century context of the Christians it was written to, just like we read the rest of the New Testament? Other big topics we're going to cover are, who is the Harlot Babylon? Is there a Harlot Babylon in the world right now? And how can we Christians today avoid her sins? What beast characteristics of the first century Roman Empire have parallels with today? Is there an Antichrist in the world today? And finally, what does it mean to be a witness? I hope this conversation gets you thinking and that the book of Revelation comes alive to you and becomes more practical to you as you listen. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. In today's episode, we're back with our friend Dan Morrison to talk about the book of Revelation again, describing what it originally meant to its original audience of first century Christians. Dan, I know we talked to you already in the last episode, but could you just give us a brief intro again to yourself, who you are, what you do for a living, where you live, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so my name is Dan Morrison. I currently live in Okinawa, Japan, as I'm serving as an active duty Navy chaplain. And yeah, what I do, I basically try to take care of Marines and sailors out here in the East.
That's awesome. So yeah, we're just gonna jump right in. I know in our last episode you kind of gave us a real picture of who you are, and we got to know you. But today we're just gonna jump right in. So today we're gonna talk a bit about the way that the assumption that Revelation is just all about prediction, and there's this assumption that it's all about the future, and it's not necessarily a book about something having to do with the first century believers. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons Christians think that Revelation is all about the future is because at the end of the book, Jesus comes back, and that event is still in the future. It hasn't happened yet. And so a lot of Christians think that the whole book then is about future events, not about stuff in the first century. So what would be your response to that?
Well, let me first of all say I can see why some people approach the text that way. There is this futuristic aspect that we have to it, but I would say that it reflects an unjustly selective reading of the text when we go about it that way. To use some other examples, if you read the Synoptic Gospels have discussions of the coming of the Son of Man. But we don't place the synoptics in the future. We look at them as a past account that then looks forward to this. When we read the book of Acts begins with the discussion of Christ's return after he ascends into heaven, and then ends in the closing chapter with Paul declaring and proclaiming the kingdom of God. So, we see this, and maybe we should then look at Revelation and read it like we read these other books, that they are historically rooted writings that guide people who follow Jesus and how they should live in the present as they look to the future.
Is it, by the way, I just love your answers, Dan. It's so great talking to you. Is it possible to, I just thought of this wasn't on our little sheet that we gave you in advance. I'm kind of, just putting you on the spot, but is it possible that John thought, the return of Christ was like just about to happen in his life? He's describing stuff that's happening there. It's like, to him, maybe he thought Christ was just about to come back right as these events are happening.
Absolutely. So if you look at the language of nearness regarding the coming of Jesus that shows up within Revelation, he's about to come back. Like, it's time. And it's really funny because when you look at Revelation being written in about the mid-90s, it's almost, not quite, I hope this doesn't sound sacrilegious to some people, but it's almost as if you have that countdown to the turn of the century framework that happens all the time with people like Y2K, the world's about to end. And it's almost like John is in that same framework, but he's like, it's actually going down. And I actually see what Jesus was talking about. So a little bit different, but it almost has that same impetus for us when we read it. It's
interesting too, historically as well. It's like the Y2K, we all freaked out for that one. At the turn of the first millennium, 1000 AD, a lot of Christians were convinced Jesus was coming back then as well. So it is interesting at these turns of centuries and millenniums. But we want to go in this conversation now. We want to take our listeners on a journey through some of the main symbols of Revelation. And we want to talk the two things. What did it mean then? And then how do we apply it now? Mm-hmm. So what was John thinking and what were his readers understanding when he wrote these symbols? And then once we understand that, then kind of how can we kind of apply that to today? So we want to start with the beast. So obviously in Revelation, there's a lot of talk about this beast empire, which, you know, many modern evangelical Christians have imagined to be some future, you know, European Union or Islamic empire. They've imagined all kinds of things, as we talked about in the first episode. I think we can. Yes, exactly. All of that stuff from the Left Behind series and stuff. But what we talked about in the first episode was, like, John was actually describing something in his day. He was describing the Roman Empire of his day. Right. That was the beast empire. So now, based on that, can you maybe take us through what are 4 or 5 of sort of the main characteristics of that first century Roman Empire that then are described as sort of beast characteristics in Revelation? And then maybe from there we can have a conversation about, and now do any of those, what you know, how are those? And then let's talk about that in comparison to our society today. That's kind of a lot. Start talking.
Good question. I have to admit, I'm wondering how many people are actually trying to Google what Y2K was. So.
Yes.
But I think
everybody under 30.
Right. So do you think that when he says grace and peace to you in his greeting in Revelation 1, that he's actually countering the framework of the Pax Romana, which brought peace through bloodshed? I mean, you have an unjust, oppressive legal system at work where the devil is throwing people into prison, where people are dying, not because of anything that's immoral, but it is illegal. So within an unjust imperial system, you have legality that does not necessarily equate to morality. You have the presentation of politicians and political systems as messianic, because all of a sudden the beast is worshipped. The beast brings about people's salvation, and people are looking to the beast to basically care for them and provide for them. You have the demand of loyalty by worldly political systems. Go ahead.
Can I just, for people just following along here, can you expand a little bit on that messianic thing? Like the Roman leaders encourage this kind of thing. Could you describe some of what they encouraged and how they spoke of themselves and how people thought of them in Roman times in the first century?
Okay. Easy. So when we stop and look at this, we find that there are emperors who are seen as the Son of God. Now, it was common for political leaders, even like ancient Israelite kings, to be seen as God's son. The difference is these Roman rulers were not simply seen as like the divine sons, but they were seen as divine themselves. And so it was encouraged that they be worshiped as such. It was encouraged that people would give offerings to them. And as a result, we see that there's an entire system that then marries the religious system and the political system. Why do I feel like I'm talking about contemporary things now? I don't know what's going on. So what we end up finding is that there's a lot of debauchery that takes place within the human frameworks of the kings. And then when we look at the Roman Empire, it gets really bad. I mean, you know, you got people killing people just for the sake of it. We've got other individuals who are like, I want to ascend to power, therefore. And so basically it was, are you on the side of the person who gains power or loses power? And that's going to determine your fate as we move into this society. The difference is that when you see Christ as king, and I think we talked about this the last time, but Christ actually purchases the citizens of his kingdom, his slaves, with his own blood, and then elevates them to a status where they are with him and function as a kingdom of priests and co-heirs of the kingdom. So I think that's the difference that we find, as opposed to worldly empires where there's the marginalization and death of the marginalized by the governments.
Oh, that's good. So I'm just kind of summing up. I was making little notes here on a piece of paper as you were going. Some of the things you mentioned there that we see in Revelation as critiques of the first century Roman Empire, this beast empire, where they brought peace. Everybody talked about the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, but it was brought through bloodshed and violence. Mm-hmm. They had an unjust legal system. They were putting Christians in prison. It had nothing to do with moral, right or wrong, but it was an unjust legal system. They had leaders that were worshipped. Messianic leaders thought of themselves as saviors and gods and wanted that worship. And then the leaders themselves were debauched and violent. Mm-hmm. So this is, John's writing this critique of things going on in his day. He's not thinking about some time, thousands of years in the future. But having said that, now we come along, we read it. We now need to apply what John was describing from his day into our day. Maybe you want to just start talking. What are some things you see? And let's keep it like to North America. Let's keep it to our context.
Okay.
Where do you see overlap between some of those descriptions of the first century Roman beast empire and what we're living in today?
Whew. All right. We're getting into some deep water right now. So I think that some of the overlap that I see is we are okay with bloodshed. I'll speak from like a U.S. context for a moment. Like, totally okay with bloodshed. It's like, under what circumstances do you do? Well, give me a reason, and I just might kill you. I mean, now that's not everybody across the board, but there is a great part of the culture that actually, I think, embraces that framework. Whereas, there's this whole issue of defense and offense and, the exertion of power upon another to actually like destroy somebody if necessary. Whereas we see in Revelation, Christ calls his people to follow his example. And as the slain lamb, we see that his followers are also slain. So I think the issue is we find people, and I think this is universal across a North American framework. People want to hold on to their earthly lives in this present age so much that they'll do anything almost to preserve it.
Including killing
other people. I think that's one thing we can see. I think the other one is that we can all say that there are unjust issues that take place within our legal systems. No matter what country you're in North America, it's like, wait, this isn't quite coming out right. And so all of a sudden we're finding that there's a parallel between this present age and the past with regard to legality and morality. And there are things that are legal that aren't moral, and there are things that are moral that are not legal. And we have to figure out, how do we then, as the people of God, actually navigate that? Because we see in Revelation, instead of attempting to fight a governmental system, the people of God are called to live as kingdom people into the eschatological telos that we have as the people of God, that we function as the kingdom no matter what. And that means that we don't actually fight the governmental systems in the way that we want to fight them in the flesh. So in other words, I'm going to draw on Paul for a second in Ephesians 6, where he says that the struggle is not against blood and flesh, but against principalities and powers and the cosmic rulers in high places. I mean, so this is the difference that we have to look at, is we find, and I love this when it comes to the book of Ephesians, and when we look at a North American context, we actually parallel the church in Ephesus in some ways within North America, because the church in Ephesus seems to have power, and the church in Ephesus, and I mean, this is like not just in the book of Ephesians, but in the church in Ephesus in Revelation chapter 2, has power and exerts it in an imperial way to take their freedoms and attempt to destroy and crush those who oppose them. And here's the problem with that. It does not parallel the way of Jesus. And that is one sure sign, I think, of an imperial framework that is ungodly, is when the people who profess to be of Christ's ecclesia, the gathering of Christ's citizens in an area, function just like the broader empire does in order to assert their own dominion. It leads us to a place where we, how do I put this very, very delicately? I'm just going to say it.
Go for it.
It puts us in a place where we actually oppose the principles and teachings of the kingdom of God, and we live as worldly citizens of an ungodly kingdom instead.
Even if we have the word Jesus at the top of it.
If we put the name Jesus at it, we have baptized it and sanctified it in order that we might do what we want to do in his name, when really we are adopting the methods and ways of the kingdom. Sounds like the Crusades. Oh, I didn't say that out loud, did I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Kris, did you want to ask more questions on that first symbol, or could we jump to the next one?
Yeah, we can jump to the next one.
Okay.
I mean, we could go all day probably on that one there, but
I know. So the next one is Harlot Babylon. And so this is coming from Revelation 18 and 19, and that is the lengthy prophecy about the fall and utter destruction of Babylon. And there are many Christians think that prophecy is a prediction of the destruction of some future mega city, where a one world government is ruling from that city. What do you think of that expectation?
Let's see, if you're looking for that, you're going to miss it. It's like, read the tea leaves, folks. This is not what he's talking about. I mean, when we stop and look at it, what did it reasonably mean to the original audience? It seems that if the Babylon of John's day is Rome, which it seems to be, then what we find is the destruction of Rome that happens a little bit later. And I think when we move forward and we see Rome destroyed and burning with fire, I'm like, this might be it.
Yeah.
But what we want to do is, we're so caught up in making it about ourselves that we don't actually recognize what it was in the past. And this is part of the reason why history is very important. When we see the destruction of Rome, it's like, what is being foretold, even if it's not literal fire involved in the historic account, we see Rome's fall, we see Rome's demise, and we see the entire collapse of the empire.
Yeah.
That's the key message of this. Now,
So would you say?
not only that
So
one
would you
empire.
say? Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, would you say, like, so before we were talking about the beast, and now it's Babylon, the harlot. Like, would you say there are two different images kind of describing the same thing, or is there a difference there?
It's really interesting. I would say that the harlot is still, it's weird because the harlot seems to be this ancient depiction of Roma, like the ancient goddess of Rome itself.
Yeah.
So the harlot is a symbol of the people of the empire who are now riding on the back of the empire itself, who are on the beast. In the same way that the bride is the collective people of God who are then the bride of Christ. So we have this sexual framework in place for both of them, which has negative sexual imagery and positive sexual imagery. But here's the problem. Bringing it to not only the historical past, but the contemporary present. Explain to me why the bride of Christ chooses to get in bed with the beast of empire when it's the harlot who rides the beast, not the bride.
okay, now if you can get a little specific on that, when you say what you're saying, what you're seeing in our society and culture today in North America, we're going to keep it there. You're seeing the church, the bride of Christ, get in bed with the beast empire of our day. Like, what can you get specific? I know maybe you're probably trying not to get in trouble, but that's okay. You're in Japan. You're safe. What are you seeing? What are you seeing there?
I mean, so let's look at it from this standpoint of view. We have people who have basically turned social, worldly, political affiliations into litmus tests for whether or not you are a Christian. Are you in the U.S. a Republican or a Democrat? Are you in Canada? Are you conservative or are you with the NDP? So all of a sudden. I mean, like, we have this whole framework set up to where all of a sudden you find your affiliation isn't based on your holding to the creeds that are historic within the church or the authority of scripture, but it's almost as if, I'm going to say it, politicians can read the tea leaves themselves as a society and they can tell you, oh, wait a minute, I can ride in on this Christian group's like coattail to get support, because if I say the right things, it doesn't matter what I do or what I actually believe. If I say the right thing and I give them an offer of a taste of the kingdom, the power, and the glory of which I plan on entering into, they'll support me no matter what.
Yeah.
So Revelation, by the way, that's a powerful way to read, and powerful, I should say, but a different. So for our listeners, I want to offer them patience and grace. If you've been thinking about Revelation as a prediction of something coming in the future, some future mega city, one world government, this way of reading Revelation, understanding it in its first century context, and then saying that applies to us today, suddenly becomes very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Because it challenges us in everything that we do. That's the difficulty of reading Revelation in this way, is that it makes me have to go and say, okay, in what ways am I embracing the empire? In what ways do I give tacit approval? In what ways, to go back to Revelation 18, have I not followed and heeded the call of the sound from heaven that says, come out of her, my people, lest you take part in the judgments because you've taken part in her sins.
Now, for some Christians, I'm going to just play devil's advocate here for just a moment. Some Christians might say coming out of this empire means fighting against, and again, these are very legitimate causes.
Yeah.
But it means politically fighting against, abortion, gender stuff, marriage stuff, whatever people believe. And I'm not commenting even on the actual beliefs themselves. They can be totally good things. I'm
right.
pro-life, right? But they might say that's how we come out of the beast, is we fight against those things politically. What would you say to that?
Jesus was crucified by the very political powers. And, okay. Luke's gospel for a second, okay? Luke chapter 4, the temptation of Jesus. In the temptation narrative, I want to read it just to make sure that I'm reading it correctly, okay? Now, in Luke chapter 4, verse 5, it begins by saying, and the devil took Jesus and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time and said to him, to you I will give all this authority and their glory, for it has been delivered to me, and I give it to whom I will. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours. Jesus was tempted with the kingdoms of the world, the glory and the authority that there was. And guess what?
He said no.
He said no. So why does the church then attempt to wield the imperial power of the empire in which they live in order to do the very thing, to do the very thing that Jesus refused to do? That's what I would say to that. Jesus did not call his people to, and he didn't model this, where he's all of a sudden coming in and he's, coming down and blasting, the Rome. Like, Jesus wasn't actually doing this. He tells the people of God, hey, think about it. Should we pay taxes to Caesar? Whose image is on this coin? Oh, Caesar. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Oh, wait. And to God that which is God's. And because human beings are those who bear God's image, he's telling them, in a system where you're giving what belongs to Caesar, you need to be giving God what's God's. That whole passage, and I hate the fact that most editors and editorial boards of Bible translations put a heading there and it's like, paying taxes to Caesar. You miss the point if that's all you get out of this, because the real thing is giving God that which bears his image, which is you. And so if we get stuck on the idea that we're supposed to fight, then we've once again forgotten that our struggle is not against blood and flesh.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, why are we then engaging in a carnal manner, in a fleshly manner, in that which is actually a cosmic spiritual battle? Paul instructs and says, oh, wait, pray for those who are in authority. He didn't say, if you agreed with their political views, pray for those in authority. Or if you disagree, pray for those in authority. He said, pray for those in authority. Oh, wait, but I don't want to pray for them. So what do I do with that? Then you're disobeying scripture. So now you have to ask, if I'm disobeying that which I consider to be the word of God, am I living as a follower of Jesus, or am I living as a citizen of a worldly kingdom?
So how,
That's so
and we're getting, yeah, this is so good. And I'm a little bit rabbit trained, but I can just feel people's questions. How in a Jesus way, how in a lamb-like way do we then engage as responsible citizens in a democratic system?
Oh, good. Please vote. I have no problem with that. If that's your conviction, go vote. If your conviction is not to vote, live that out. But I would still say, live it out in a way that you don't look down on those who do vote. I mean, it's just that simple. But here's the thing, though. Who is the we? And are you identifying the Christians as those who are of your political affiliation, or is it those of your political affiliation, some of whom might be it gets really jumbled because we don't maintain a clear system of a kingdom of God focus. And as a result, maybe it's good for me to, let's see, vote for someone who actually not only gives promises to me, but lives biblically, if this is what I'm going to go for. Maybe it's my responsibility to, if I'm voting for people, actually call them out when they don't do things in a godly manner, especially if they profess to be Christians. Maybe that means I need to send a letter to my congressperson or my MP in order for them to actually know what I'm thinking. And I was a person who supported them, and maybe call people out when they're wrong. But here's the thing. Sometimes we become so focused on winning, whatever that means, that we don't say anything because we're afraid that then if we confront the powers that be, we will suffer and we will be marginalized. And at that point, it becomes about nothing more than self-preservation, that I might have a seat at your right hand or on your left hand, but I'm not willing to actually oppose you and confront you regarding what you are doing. And that's what happens. John is in exile on Patmos because he is opposing the government. Christians in Smyrna are going to be put in prison by Satan because they are opposing his regime. The issue is we get so caught up in earthly matters that we fail to, I got to say this. We get so caught up in earthly matters that we fail to recognize the present reign of Christ and the reality of his kingdom now.
I
Sorry,
love
I got
that.
a little fiery right there.
Yeah, no, this is
this is
great.
really good, and I think this is a good segue to kind of the next symbol, which is the Antichrist. And I grew up thinking that, I'm going to say George W. Bush, he was one time the Antichrist in my mind. I seriously thought this was.
How could a Republican be the Antichrist? The Republican will be Democrat or NDP or liberal.
Hey, that's what I thought at one point. I'm crazy. So, I'm curious to know, how did the people in the first century think about the language surrounding the Antichrist? And is the word Antichrist even in Revelation?
The word Antichrist is not in Revelation. It is a Johannine language, like word, but it actually shows up in First John initially, but it's not in Revelation. So we've got this whole thing where we have conflated these two images within like Johannine literature. But
Johannine just means John for our listeners.
Yeah. Thanks, Kris. Sorry about that.
All good. You're doing awesome.
But like what we've done is we've been like, oh yeah, the Antichrist. Well, let's see, what does John say in First John? He says, children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, so now many Antichrists have come. But how does he define Antichrist? That's the key issue. For John, the Antichrist is the one who denies that Christ has come in the flesh. For him, it's all about the denial of the incarnation, but we have taken this because it sounds so like major, and we've placed it on like random people. And I mean, when we stop and we think about it, and I find it funny because if I'm not mistaken, I hope this isn't just legend or something that I falsely remember, but reading that Luther during the Reformation, when he did his translation of Revelation, which I find it funny that he even did a translation of Revelation since it was
Yeah.
expedient for him,
Yeah.
since he says that Christ was neither seen nor known in the book.
Yeah, he didn't like the book. Or James. Was it James too? He didn't want those in the Bible.
An epistle of straw.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
what he does is he actually uses the text of Revelation to demonize the Roman Catholic Church. And so on all the evil figures like the beast, he did it was like an illustrated version of Revelation. And so on all the evil figures, he drew papal crowns.
Classic.
And so what people have done is they've tried to use.
Imagine if he'd had access to AI, the stuff have been turning out.
Brilliant, Kris.
Like, oh, that'd be freaky. I mean, when we stop and think about it, the whole idea of Antichrist is not this one figure at the end of time that's going to arise and persecute the church. Like John says, oh, wait, it is the last hour. Antichrist is coming, and many antichrists have already come.
Yeah.
Because for him, Antichrist is not about some political figure who is going to be a world ruler and bring about a one world government and force us all to like take a stamp on our right hand or forehead. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, well, now you've got my mark and you get to spend eternity with me. It's more so a case of this is the one who opposes the message of the kingdom. This is the one who opposes that Christ actually was incarnate. Like, think about this. If you go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, where we have the promise of a redemption coming about from the seed of the woman, being Eve, that means that the Redeemer has to be a human being if it's of her seed. The issue is that for John, in First John, the idea of Antichrist was all about people who were denying the teacher, the one who denies the Father and the Son, the one who makes these denials. And so it's the one who is not confessing that Christ is from God. So these are the things that we have to recognize. As
So would you say anyone kind of that throughout history or today, anyone who is, persecuting Christians or denying Christ as Lord is somehow participating in the Antichrist spirit somehow? Is that would that be fair? Yeah.
No, that's absolutely fair.
It's not some one guy in the future. It's the Antichrist spirit is at work in our world all around us today. I hope everybody who's listening, just let it sit, let it sink in, think about it, ponder it. This is very good. Thanks, Dan.
No, thank you.
Do you want to go off? You want to get to Revelation 11 there yet, Kris?
Oh, I would love to. The two witnesses and the church. I think this would be a fun one to end on. So can you tell us a bit about the two witnesses?
And maybe just for people listening again, because they probably don't, they might be driving. So hopefully you don't have a Bible open in front of you if you're driving, because that would be beast behavior. That's not lamb behavior.
Yes.
Can you just describe for us, what is Revelation 11 is this crazy scene? Mm-hmm. Describe it for us and then maybe explain to us what it means.
Okay. So in Revelation 11, you've got these two. How do we even deal with this? I'm like, we've got these two witnesses. Now, I think first and foremost, we have to recognize and remember that being a witness is something that is very innate in Revelation. That's part of the call of following Jesus, is being a witness. And being a witness can even mean giving your life. What do? They prophesy. They call down fire from heaven. They do all of these things and no one harms them. So here's what it seems. It seems, at least on some level, that the two witnesses are a depiction of the people of God. If we pull over the political and the religious that we see in Zechariah, where you have a description that talks about the olive trees and the lampstands and all of this, and we bring it over into Revelation, I would assert that what we ultimately see is the people of God functioning as the kingdom and priests. You have the political and the religious. But notice, though, the church is not destroyed. If these are the people of God, like the collective church of Christ, they're not destroyed. And even when it looks like, they're going to be trampled upon and overcome, what happens? They lie in the streets for 3.5 days, and then all of a sudden they rise from the dead, and they're like, we're out. Peace out, you guys. Like, nice try. Now, here's the thing. People are sometimes like, oh, it's Elijah and Moses because they didn't die. And I mean, like, I've heard all of these. Elijah and Enoch. I mean, like, all of these things. I'm like, wait. So they have to come back and they have to die in order to go back. I'm like, no. Like,
I used to teach that like 10 years ago. That was me.
oh,
Enoch and Elijah.
yeah.
They never died, so they got to come back. They got to die.
It's appointed unto man wants to die, so they have to die too. And then I'm like, wait, no. But it seems more so like this is a picture of the collective people of God in the same way that the people of God in the Old Testament were a kingdom of priests.
Mm-hmm.
In the New Testament, you have this kingdom and priest framework. And so I would assert that because of the background of Zechariah, he's simply showing, hey, the collective people of God will endure. But it is also the collective people of God's responsibility to prophetically speak to the culture in which they live. And that is what these people do. The two witnesses directly model what it means to speak to the culture and forewarns those who follow the way of Christ and prophetically speak to the culture that you will face opposition. You will face opposition from the beast. You will face opposition from those who are affiliated with the world. Expect that. And so here's the issue, though. Is it a case where people who prophetically speak in accord with the word of God, to speak to the issues in their society, who speak to the issues in their culture, they don't only receive opposition from people outside the church, but those who are in the church?
Yeah.
So then that leads to a question. Are there some people in the church who are actually associated with the beast?
That's provocative. Wow. Now this leads me to
That's some good food for thought. Thank you.
Oh yeah. So the language of witness. I remember years ago when I first kind of really jumping into Revelation, it occurred to me that the language of witness, and correct me if I'm wrong, but coming from the Greek word martyro, from which the word martyr comes from. But I kind of thought, witnessing, you go around and hand out tracts about, the salvation message and all those sort of things. But that's actually not what the language of witness is about. So So could you maybe unpack that? Because I can hear some of our listeners wondering, maybe they're confused about that word witness.
So I think part of the idea of witness is it's a reflection of what your life is. What does the depiction of your life present? Not simply me going around and doing what we call witnessing or evangel. A better word would be evangelization for that, or proclamation of the gospel. But especially within this framework, if you were a witness, let's say in court, you had to stand for Jesus and tell the truth. Now, here's the thing. Some people are like, well, see, I'm going to stand for Jesus and I'm going to tell the truth and I'm going to go out and... That's not what he's talking about. Your witness is, how do you identify with Christ and his kingdom amid a world that doesn't? How do you stand for Christ and his kingdom in a godly way when the government in which you live is opposed to the gospel of the kingdom? How do you, as the church of Jesus Christ, function? So your witness, I would assert, is how well are you reflecting Christ in a world that doesn't accept him?
Yeah.
It's very good.
It's the way you live. Your life is the witness.
Right. And oddly enough, when we actually look at this, the interesting thing is, can you bear witness? Absolutely. But in the process of bearing witness, what does that actually mean? I think that when we, on one level, is to offer testimony. especially within a historical context. If you were to bear witness or to provide, like martyreo being the term, what you end up doing is, what are you offering testimony about? Well, for Christians who are being brought before people, think about it. Jesus tells his disciples, even in the Gospels, oh yeah, people are going to bring you before judges and magistrates, and you're going to be flogged and beaten. But then to bear witness is also to declare or to confirm something. So it's always about working in such a way that you are reflecting and giving the truth. But then again, it also expanded in terms because people began to be martyred. So that's the reason why witness and martyrdom came together, because people were being martyred for the witness they were bearing.
That's good. Well, thanks so much, Dan.
Yeah, no, this is very good.
This has been awesome. We appreciate you taking the time from out there in Japan, and all the best to you. We have been blessed getting to listen to you. Kris, is there anything you want to say here to end off?
No, I'm just so thankful we could get you for another hour. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Again.
No, thank you.